All right, hi ladies. So today we are going to be doing chapter 16. For those of you that were in class for chapter 16, you can either skip this or use it to review. But it's talking about government spends, collects, and owes. So what I want you to think about before we even begin, I want you to do a quick journal write where you decide how should government's funds be spent and who should benefit from government funds. I want you to write about who you think would benefit the most from government funds. So write that down because that's going to be important for next semester as we get into AP Gov. The next part is what is the right amount of government spending, and I want you to think about that. Remember that veto current event where Obama vetoed that military spending bill, and use that as a reference. So over the past 30 years, government has grown significantly. Currently, today, there are 2.8 million people that work for the federal government. That's huge. So that means that the economy has hugely increased over the past several years, but that also means that there's been increasing government involvement in things like regulation, funding, etc. In the economy, in the sectors of transportation, education, product safety, worker safety, and taxation. So government spending currently exceeds over 40% of GDP, which is a huge number. And that's not necessarily either a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just important to know that the government spending, the amount of money that the government spends, makes up a huge percentage. So that G in the formula for GDP is huge. That's 40% of the GDP. So don't forget that in your formulas. All right, so government taxing and spending have opportunity cost is another thing to think about. So break this down. What is opportunity cost? Think it out in your head. Is the idea that there are certain trade-offs. Either the government can tax or they can spend, but it's difficult to do both, right? There's trade-offs to doing both. So, application question. How has the nation's increasing wealth affected the size of government? I'm going to let you think on that for a second. Okay, so it's the idea that the nation has gotten wealthier, but as it's gotten wealthier, right, remember the GDP has increased, but it's increased in large part because our country has also grown. So as the population grows, so does the size of government, and that's how we end up with increasing wealth. Okay, functions of government. You guys did a little brainstorm of this at the beginning, kind of what is the purpose of government, and the textbook says that there are 3 of those things. Number 1 is to provide the public goods. Number 2, promoting general welfare. And number 3 is regulation and economic stability. We discussed this in class, right? But those 3 are the main things. I'm going to go into those now. So providing public goods. What are public goods? In your book, they use the example of streetlights, which I thought was a really great example. It's the idea that they're all goods and services that can be used by many different people at the same time without reducing the benefit that each person receives. So if I use a streetlight, it doesn't take it away from you. We all could share the streetlight to a point. Okay, so the government may subsidize these things by requiring all taxpayers to support those things through things like for example, things like museums, ballets, classical music concerts, and in this we're talking national ballets. But those are some examples. So all the people in the country pay taxes, and a portion of those taxes is reserved for things like museums and ballet. There are also something called demerit goods, and they're goods that the government deems as undesirable. So The government then taxes, prohibits, or regulates the manufacture, sale, or use of these things. And they're kind of nicknamed sin taxes, right? So the sin taxes include things like tobacco, alcohol, and gambling. These are things that the government has decided is not good. They're not good things, and so they've actually taxed them at a higher rate than other things. Okay, so promoting the general welfare is the second responsibility of government. And Americans have elected to see that everyone has a basic level of minimum support for the aged, ill, and poor through income redistribution or tax receipts to assist those citizens in need. There are two main types. Type 1 is social insurance programs, things like Social Security, Medicare, and workers' comp. I'll go into those in a second. And public assistance is the second type, which is welfare. Okay, so social insurance programs, the first of the promoting the general welfare that the government has. These are programs that pay benefits to retired and disabled workers, their families, and the unemployed. And they're paid for by taxes that you and I would pay. And these, for example, are Social Security, monthly payments to retirees who are, or those who are unable to work. Medicare, which is low-cost health care for the elderly. You can think of health care, Medicare, to remember the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And it's only for the elderly. And then there's workers' comp. Workers' comp would be, for example, if I was walking down the hallway at school and I slipped and fell and broke my back, which hopefully I will never do, then there's actually a state program that will help to support me if I'm injured on the job and I'm unable to work. Okay, a portion of, for example, Social Security, I pay Social Security's fees out of my paycheck each month, and it's a fairly significant portion of taxes that go into my Social Security program. All right, public assistance is the next kind, and these include welfare, supplemental security income, temporary assistance for needy families, and Medicaid. Okay, public assistance is also called welfare, so those are kind of synonymous. Supplemental security income is federally funded money that goes to aged, blind, and the disabled to buy food, shelter, and clothing. So it's to cover the basics. And again, this is federally funded. Next is temporary assistance for needy families. Generally, this gives money to needy families who have young kids, but you'll notice that the bar for this is very, very low. You guys might remember that from your cost of living project, how low it is. Then there's the last is Medicaid, state and federal programs that help pay healthcare costs for low-income and disabled persons. So Medicaid it's again for healthcare costs, but it goes to low-income and disabled persons, whereas Medicare goes towards just the elderly. Okay, the third responsibility of government is regulating economic activity, which is protecting consumers through regulations from externalities. Externalities are the side effects that either benefit or harm a third party not involved in the activity that caused it. For example, food, right? We all trust that we can eat the food that we have. If you go to the grocery store, you buy eggs and you trust that they're going to be good eggs, that they're not going to make you sick. And that is as a result of state and federal regulations put in at the very highest level by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, but on lower levels by state and local governments. There are also other types, from production processes to avoid pollution, supervision of labor and management, and also promoting competition. Those are all major areas of regulating economic activity. Okay, and the last part of this is ensuring economic stability. It is to shield citizens from the harmful effects of business fluctuations, right, for things like inflation, hyperinflation, or deflation, or recession. Um, it includes things like unemployment, high inflation, recession, and depression. Okay, so what do you think the critics say about the responsibilities of government? Take a moment and think on that. Jot down a few notes. All right, so major critics of government involvement say that merit goods should be funded by private organizations rather than taxes, and opponents think that public welfare doesn't incentivize people on welfare. They say that if there are too many ways to cheat the system, and that if people on welfare, if they're getting welfare, what is their incentive to go out and get a job if they're getting free money from the government? You will hear a lot of this argument in the political debates, and I'm very curious to hear what you guys think now and after listening to the political debates, if anything changes. Okay, next we have the federal budget and the national debt. These are huge. Congress and the president work together to prepare an annual budget that shows the anticipated federal expenditures and revenues for the coming fiscal year. The fiscal year for the federal government has weird start and end dates. It starts October 1st and it ends September 30th of the next year. Those are weird dates. They're not January, and it's not the start of the school year. We think it's probably because of political dates about when they're in session, but it's a little tricky. And you can see the calendar over here on the right. This image is in your textbook on page 427, and I think it does a fabulous job of telling you what the steps are in the budget process. Because it's a lengthy process. You can see it starts in February and of the previous year. So if you go February through September, the executive branch agencies, so I think you all know the executive branch agencies, so we're talking about the agencies of the federal government, develop requests for funds and submit them to the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB. Then from September through December, the President and the OMB review the requests and make the fiscal decisions on what goes in the budget and what goes out. The budget is then printed and formally sent to Congress. So right around this time of year, right? And you guys will see that, so pay attention to Obama putting through the budget. Then in January through September, so coming up in January, the House and Senate budget committees review the president's proposed budget. By April 15th, which is tax day, these committees prepare an initial resolution for the budget that goes to the entire Congress for debate. By September 25th, the congressional budget should be finalized and passed by the House of Representatives, which approves spending and revenue bills. Then, by October 1st, the fiscal year begins, and October 1st through September 30th, the agency program managers implement the budget and disperse funds. And then October through November, data on actual spending and receipts for the completed fiscal year becomes available, and the Government Accountability Office audits the fiscal year outlays. So as you can see, it's a very, very long process, and I want you to think a little bit about how this process might go, given that we have a Democratic president and Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate. So think a little bit about that, that this calendar is actually a little longer, especially in recent years. They've had a really hard time with sticking to the timeline. And so you will pay attention to that this year and see how it goes. This is another kind of a visual version of how it works. And you can see, so Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, Department of Education, all those other groups, all those federal agencies submit the budget for review to the president. The president then reviews it, decides what stays in, what goes out, He then submits a budget request to Congress. The House reviews and does a budget resolution. The Senate reviews and does a budget resolution. Then they all get together and hash it out. Say yes, say no, this is what we like, this is what we don't like. Then they send it back to the president, and he either vetoes it or signs it into law. And as we saw in that last current event, talking about military spending, the president used his veto power to veto part of the budget. He said, nope, I don't like it. I don't like that you're trying to increase double the amount of money for the Department of Defense. So for only the 5th time in his 8-year presidency, he used his veto, his presidential veto power. Okay, so budget in the news. There is a couple of things I wanted to show you. So first of all, this is a clip that looks like it didn't quite get in. I'm going to actually post it in the link and suggest that you watch it. It's very entertaining, so I will post the link for that there. It's called The Grand Budget Passed Hotel, and it's from Jon Stewart. But I also wanted to show you this. This is the U.S. Office of Management and Budget website. And interestingly, you can see the president's budget for fiscal year 2016, where they actually lay out what the budget is. And if we were in class, I would actually have you guys click through this and read through different parts of it. And you might look at some of the types of language that they have in there. They have very active language. For example, these proposals will help working families feel more secure with paychecks that go further, help American workers upgrade their skills so they can compete for higher paying jobs. I mean, these are things that are hard to argue with. So you'll see kind of how this goes about doing it. It's interesting. I also wanted to show you a current event from CNBC about this year's budget. Oh, looks like they lost it. Go away. Okay, well, it's not on here, but it's interesting just hearing about this year's budget. I want you to pay attention to that. Okay, moving on to the national debt. You need to know the national debt, the formula for that is it's the total of all yearly deficits minus any yearly surpluses equals the national debt. The government borrows money to cover the deficit by selling government securities to individuals, businesses, and foreign governments. When you buy a bond, you are giving a loan to the government. It's pretty crazy, right? They're borrowing money from you. So when there's a budget deficit, the government is spending more than it receives in tax revenues during the fiscal year. And overspending is called deficit financing. So when you're kind of spending on borrowed money, it's called deficit financing. And when you have outstanding debt, it's called the national debt. On the other side of that, a budget surplus is a situation when the amount of government receipts, so the amount of money a government receives, is larger than its expenditures during the fiscal year. But frankly, we don't have one of those right now, and you probably won't see those for a few years. I wanted to show you this. This is the U.S. debt clock. This number keeps changing, so I'm not going to try to say it. But you can see it has over 18, what is this? Hundreds, thousands, billions, or millions, billions, trillions. So we're talking $18 trillion of U.S. national debt. So you can see debt per citizen is 57,000, debt per taxpayer 155,000. U.S. federal spending is up. U.S. federal budget deficit is down. So if you just look at this, you can see this is the incoming. The green is the incoming. The red is outgoing. Largest budget, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Defense and War, Income Security, Net Interest on Debt, and Federal Pensions. So interestingly, you can see all of these. You can see our US GDP, total spending. It's really interesting if you take some time to kind of click through this. It might be a little hard to focus on because it does keep moving. But you can see this for yourself if you want to spend some more time on it, usdebtclock.org. Okay, so I also wanted to show, I also wanted to show you this chart which shows the GDP as a gross national debt as a percent of GDP. So what you'll see is we had huge national debt during World War II. We got it kind of down under control right around Reagan and Bush. And then right around Clinton is when we kind of peaked and we started actually going back down. Our debt was only 60% of GDP. Under Bush 2, we went way up to about 80%. And under Obama, it's actually kept increasing. So it's interesting. You can see this might be a slightly biased chart, but it's interesting just to see what percent of GDP it is. So these were two interesting questions that I found people ask a lot. Who holds our debt? How many foreign countries hold our debt? And was it actually balanced under President Clinton? Oh gosh, none of my links are working today. So I'm going to let you kind of peek around in here. If you're interested, go to the Forbes website. All right, so ask yourself this question. And when we come back, we will move on to taxation. I'll see you in the next lecture.